This presentation will be published at the SciLifeLab repository. Welcome to this seminar, SciLifeLab FAIRstorage, how to apply for storage resources. My name is Jonas Svensson. I am the head of IT systems and infrastructure within SciLifeLab Data Centre. This is our agenda for today. I will start off with a quick introduction to SciLifeLab FAIRstorage, and then turn over to Elisabeth Sundström, who will give a brief overview on how to register an application in Super. After that, Volmar Nyberg Åkerström will demonstrate the Data Stewardship Wizard, a data management plan tool essential in the application process. And then Angela Fuentes Pardo will introduce the SciLifeLab Data Repository. We will end with a Q&A, and if you have any questions during the presentation, please write them in the chat so we can address them in the end. First, if there is only one thing that you will take away from this presentation, it should be this. All information about SciLifeLab FAIRstorage and all instructions and guidelines are published on this one site. We will even publish internal guidelines for how we evaluate applications on this site. We want to be fully transparent and help you get access to these resources. So please, make sure you start your application process by visiting this site. And on this site, this is a document you want to and need to read. Guidelines for applicants and administrators. This is a master document. It is a starting point in the application process. So please, find your way to this site and read this guideline. So, on the 16th of November, we launched SciLifeLab FAIRstorage. This is another important milestone in our endeavor to support open science and data-driven research within life science. We are providing more than 7 petabytes of storage at Uppmax for anyone affiliated with a Swedish organization working within the field of data-driven life science. We at Data Center has a mission to facilitate world-class research and enhancing research quality by offering a suite of impactful services. We contribute to open science and removing barriers to reuse of research outputs. We do this in accordance with the SciLifeLab data policy set down by the SciLifeLab board in 2022. That expresses SciLifeLab's commitment to the values of open science, transparent research, and FAIR principles. You will find a link to this document at our site. We are very excited to provide this service that we believe will be beneficial both to researchers, research groups, and to the research community. It will also promote open science and support the ambition of researchers to share data over time. This storage is intended to be used for data sharing and collaboration. So part of the application process is to verify that the resources are used in line with the FAIR principles. That is, to ensure that the data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we strive to make this process as easy and as convenient as possible. And we will offer support and tools to the community. We will keep working on our processes, our guidelines, and our services, and we encourage everyone to come with feedback and suggestions for improvements. Most of our documents will have text like this, asking for your help. This is in many ways a community effort. Applications to FAIRstorage is to be done in the Super tool. and Elisabeth will soon have a short introduction. Application is done within super rounds, and we will have one new round each year. And the rounds will be open throughout the whole year. So it does not matter when you apply. Storage projects will be granted for 1 year at a time. But we expect that most storage projects will be continued for many years. That means that there will be a need for many to reapply for storage once a year. But don't worry, we will make this process as smooth as possible to ensure that no one has to spend unnecessary time on administration. If you have kept your data management plan up to date and using the resources as intended, you should have no problems. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn over to Elisabeth.
Thank you, Jonas. So my name is Elisabeth, and I will explain a few details around the application process for the FAIRstorage. And to start with, I will guide you through the initial application steps in Super. So I guess that many of you are already familiar with Super, and that's short for Swedish User and Project Repository. And this is the portal where you apply for many different compute and storage resource projects. You find it at the webpage super.nice.se, and the easiest way to log in is to use your SWAM ID, your university login, and two-factor authentication. So when you're logged in Super, you go to Rounds in the menu to the left, and then the FAIRstorage is available under Compute Rounds, even if it's not a compute resource. But you enter the Compute Rounds, and there you go to the Center Local Compute, where the SciLifeLab 2023 round is open. So you go to that one, and inside here you can create a new proposal. And when you do that, you open the application form, and I will not go through every detail in this application form. Instead, I will focus on the basic information and how you edit it. And specifically, I will talk a bit more about the abstract part and the resource usage part. So for the abstract, it should be written in English, and it should contain a maximum of 500 words, so it's quite short. And you should include a short scientific description of your project, but don't dive too deep here, since we're not evaluating the scientific part. We just need a little bit of background so that we can put the resource application into a context. What you should focus on instead is why you need the storage space you apply for and how you will use it. And if you write a few words about this in the abstract, you should write even more about it in the next part, which is the resource usage. So this section of information is important since we do a technical review for all applications we get. And here in the resource usage, you should provide a general description of how you intend to use the storage. And you can do this, for example, by describing data flows in your project. And data flows can be, for example, how and when you will transfer data between your other storage resources and the FAIRstorage, maybe which softwares you intend to use and how you use them, and basically how you use the data within your research project. You should also shortly mention a few words about your ability to transfer and manage your data. So if you previously have had several different super projects, maybe for compute and for storage, which have led to publication, then it's of course clear to us that you have the ability to transfer and manage data. But if you don't have a history of super projects, we would like you to specify that you and your team have the knowledge to work with data in this type of resource. And connected to that is that we want you to think about and to estimate the size for your project and approximately how many files it will contain. And we ask for this because we need to see a relevant connection here between the data and the estimated size of the project. Then over to the very important part of the resource usage, and that's the requirement of a data management plan in SciLifeLab's data stewardship wizard, which you will hear more about in the next presentation. And having a data management plan in the data stewardship wizard, it's not just for this resource application, but it helps you to manage your data, and it is actually also a requirement from some funders to have a data management plan. But we in the FAIRstorage allocation board will specifically look at your data management plan, and we will check every section of it so that it contains relevant information. And if we need more information from you, we will get back to you. And also include a web link to your data management plan in the resource usage so that we can access it easily. Another thing that we ask you to do is to think about which repositories you will use to make your data available from your research project. And here it could be subject-specific repositories, and you could also use the SciLifeLab Data Repository, which Angela will talk a bit more about soon. If you already have a persistent identifier for any outputs from your research project, then you can specify them here in the resource usage. It could, for example, be a DOI for a publication, conference presentation, an abstract, and so on. And if you don't have it yet, that's fine. But this is really a key step in thinking open science, so we want to highlight this here already. If you're working with sensitive data and Uppsala University is not a data controller, then you need to provide a data processing agreement. And there is more information about how you make up the data processing agreements on the UppMax support web pages. So to finish this section, I would like to mention that we evaluate all applications according to the guidelines for review, which you can find on our webpage that Jonas showed you. And there you also find all other relevant documents about the FAIRstorage if you would like to read more about it. So that's everything from me.
All right, thank you. I hope my screen is displaying as it should. I'm going to give a brief introduction to what a data management plan is and how it can be useful to you. And then also present a recording of how to use a tool to create the requirement data management plan for your super application. So my name is Volmar. I work at the NBIS and part of the data management team there, also working with the SciLifeLab data management support. So the data management plan is a way of organizing a lot of aspects related to data management that would be important, sometimes not explicitly written down, but should be considered when planning any project that involves large amounts of data, or just to be able to introduce new colleagues to your project. There are two sides to this. So on the one end, this is a requirement from the Swedish Research Council for any applications which would include working with research data. And then on the other end, this is a benefit to you and your project to make sure that you don't risk losing any data or that you miss to consider any of the requirements that you need to kind of tick off before you are allowed to share data that concerns human research subjects, or if there's any intellectual property rights or anything else that could influence how the data is managed throughout the entire project. So as you can see here in the word cloud, there's a lot of different aspects that you should consider, and these should kind of trickle down into this document that is the data management plan. And going into more of the intrinsic motivators to why you should have one beyond the requirements is that it's a way of making sure that your project is efficient and adopts the best practices that you can find for managing research data. And you could use a previous data management plan as a starting point for your next project. You can share and kind of discuss good practices with other colleagues. So it could work as a useful way of optimizing your approach to data management. It could also be a way to function as a dashboard that could outline the data management practices that you have decided to adopt in your project, and then allow new members to find all the required information in one place, or at least links to where the procedures and practices are defined. And it could also be a way of explicitly outlining how you address concerns like reproducibility if your project aims to be on the forefront of open science, or if you're required to work according to the FAIR data principles, then this could also be a way of making it explicit how you address these concerns. And on the right here, you can see alluding to that there's always some sort of data management strategy in any project, but having the data management plan is a way of making it explicit, and also creating an opportunity for optimizing these practices for reuse and not just a single project's perspective. Another way of looking at the process of writing a data management plan is that you can use it as a checklist to go through to reassure that you have covered all the important aspects of data management. So there are templates that you can look at and answer kind of a battery of questions to develop this data management plan. And this can help you identify gaps in your own kind of planning, or it could also help with estimating costs and defining responsibilities across your research group. So the end result is that you want the data to be well managed and minimize the risk of data loss, as well as meeting all the requirements from funders and the best practices from the research communities. The data management plan itself, if you look at the requirements from the funders, it could be perceived as something you do as part of your funding application, and that's true for applying for this FAIRstorage, but it should be an active document that you update as your project develops and as you define new practices. So it can really function as a dashboard for members to have a coherent view on what should be done with the data. And it would also help in the final phases when you're approaching publication. So then you could find an overview of what data you have, what kind of formats and quality aspects that you might want to include with the data publication. And then after the project is concluded, you might also have this as a way of finding where you have published the different pieces of data and to which publications they are associated. So it should be considered as a living document, or that there should be several versions of this related to the different phases of the research project itself. There are some main parts to a data management plan. And these 6 parts that I'm going through here are, I think, inspired by the template or outlines given by the Research Council's template. So the first part is a description of the data, what you will be collecting and what formats and what the data themselves represent. It could also include information about the volume of the data, giving some indications on how much storage you would need, or what kinds of equipments or compute platforms you would need access to. And then there's a section on documentation, and that could be information about the practices that you have internally for annotating the data sets or linking data to different experiments, and what information you should include for each of the data sets to make sure that you can go back to this and have the information available when you either need to do some quality assurance or it's time to publish the data. Storage and backup, that's more in terms of the infrastructure and making sure that you don't lose data inadvertently. So you have the naming conventions, so you don't overwrite things, or at least know which files contains what information. And then backup strategies to make sure that you don't accidentally lose something if a person overwrites a data set, or if you need to do some cleanup activities, or you have a timeline for your storage provider and needs to migrate to another solution. Then there are some legal and ethical aspects, and those are most prominent if you're working with human or sensitive data. So it concerns confidentiality and who can access what information, and showing how you address any legal requirements in the handling of the data. It could also be a concern of intellectual property rights, and just documenting the relevant decisions and linking to the documents that would be relevant for someone at a later stage being introduced to the data, or if you need to do some maintenance activities throughout the project. And then accessibility long-term storage. This is more in terms of how the data will be available after the project has ended, and where this data will be visible to the public or the wider research community, and also for archiving purposes. And this should include the code and software used to analyze or process the data, as well as the data themselves. And that could be the raw data, in a sense, the more standardized capture that you get from the instruments or data providers, and then the process data that is the result of your analysis, or some intermediate results that are of importance. And then responsibility and resources is about making sure that there is accountability for the data management practices in the project, and especially if you have a project that spans over several organizations or even several countries, it might be important to give direct responsibility for who's responsible for keeping track of that the processes are being followed, maintained, and documented in the data management plan. And what we have at data or at the SciLifeLab in general, the Data Stewardship Wizard is a questionnaire, basically, that helps you develop your data management plan. So it's specifically tailored to address the different sections of the Swedish Research Council's template, and it will guide you through the process of identifying the different aspects of the data management plan. So you should be able to log in through this tool using your university credentials, and then follow the guide outlined by the questions in the template, and end up with a useful data management plan specifically for the life sciences, and specifically also for these applications that we're talking about. And there's a link that you can follow here, and I'm not going to paste this in the chat, but you can find it using the QR code here. And I'm going to switch over to a presentation that a colleague of mine recorded as an introduction to the specific part of this data management plan. So let me switch over to the recording. Here we go. And I need a confirmation that the sound is playing well.
Welcome to demonstration of...
Did we get some sound?
Yes, it sounds good.
Perfect. Then I'm gonna move back a second and we're gonna run it again.
Welcome to demonstration of how to use SciLifeLab Data Stewardship Wizard to create a data management plan for your project. SciLifeLab Data Stewardship Wizard is found at this URL, dsw.scilifelab.se. you log in by using your Life Science RIID, and clicking this button will take you to a login screen where you can choose your institution and then use your institutional credentials to log in. And then you will end up at the welcome screen, where you can find everything that I will go through in this demonstration today as written guidelines. And this instance of DSW is managed by SciLifeLab Data Centre and NBIS. And if you have any questions or feedback, or you need support, you're most welcome to contact us at this email address, data-management@scilifelab.se. So from the welcome screen, you can find projects that you have been working on recently, or create new projects. On the left-hand margin, we have the top level menu, where you can also find the guides and the projects page, even if you're not at the welcome screen. If you want to come back to the welcome screen at some point, you click the SciLifeLab logo up here. So how to get started? The first thing we need to do is to go to the projects page and create a new project by pressing the create button. We will need a name for a project that makes it easy to find this project for yourself and your collaborators later on. I will use today's date. Demo project. Then I need to choose a project template. There are several templates. And for today, we want to use the SciLifeLab FAIRstorage DMP template. And there are guiding texts to help you choose the right template. This template also fulfills the Swedish Research Council requirement, which means that the same data management plan as you create for your FAIRstorage application can also be used to fulfill the requirements from VR. So once you have chosen your template, you press create, and you end up at this project page. So we can hide or collapse the sidebar, and then we find a menu with different tabs on the top. These have different views depending on what you want to do. And this is the questionnaire where we answer questions. There are also different view options. We want to remove some information. And we also have to-dos, comments, and version history. So once we are oriented, we want to start answering questions. And how do we do that? Well, on the left-hand side, we have different chapters. And for each chapter, we can see a number indicating how many top-level questions remains to be answered in this chapter and in this phase. So at the top here, you have a filtering function that is called phases in the wizard. And for this project template, we have 2 phases: before submitting the DMP and before finishing the project. And the DMP is a living document that should be updated throughout your project. So you make plans at the beginning, but then you might make changes to your plan or add data sets, and then you come back and update it. Another example of something that you might add later is a persistent identifier or some kind of identifier for your data set that has been published. So this is one thing to do before you apply for a FAIRstorage extension, for example. We will be using the before submitting the DMP phase, since this is the most active phase and that has the most questions. And this is also mandatory to finish this phase before getting FAIRstorage. So let's go to look at some example questions. So chapter 2, description of data, reuse of existing data. So for each chapter, there's a short information text, what this chapter is about. And the same is true for questions. So for each question, there will be a guidance text. So here, this question reads, will you be using any pre-existing data? If you don't really know what is meant by that, you can read the guiding text to understand that this might be earlier measured data, reference data, or data that will be mined from existing literature, for example. It might refer to your own data as well as data from others. You'll also find some external links. And then you have a yes or no answer option. If we press no, we will see when this question was answered and by whom. We also get a little hint that it might be good to research if there are existing data that can be used. Data reuse is something important for open science and FAIR, and it is sometimes more efficient to reuse existing data than create your own. If we, on the other hand, choose the yes answer, more questions will follow. Let's have a look at chapter 3. We just saw questions that had options that you can just tick. But for this question, please specify what datasets you will acquire using measurement equipment. You can give many answers because there might be more than one dataset. And then you click the add button and for each dataset that you want to add. So in my pretend project, I have a dataset with RNA sequencing data. And since I know that this dataset belongs to this overall project, the important thing is that I can identify the dataset later. So the name here is for yourself and your collaborators. So who will do the measurements and where? I will be using experts at a specialized infrastructure, namely the NGI, National Genomics Infrastructure at SciLifeLab. So this was fairly straightforward questions for me to answer in this phase because I've already decided that this is going to happen. Next question. Instruments, equipment used for data. That becomes a bit more tricky. Let's see what happens if I press add here. Okay, so now I need to specify the instrument or equipment name. I'm not really sure, but I think it's some sort of Illumina equipment. Oh, as I start typing, I will get suggestions, but this is too detailed for me. I don't know this. So I will just put Illumina and I will have to figure this out. So click the plus to add a to-do. to indicate for myself that I need to come back to this later. We'll also add a comment to send email to NGI to ask for details about instrument. You can also see that once I have answered a question, it turns green, while the questions that remain to be answered are red. There are also black questions, and they are either completely optional or belongs to a later phase and can be answered later. If I come back another day, I see that I have a to-do. I click there. That will bring me exactly to that question. Also, I can look at the comment and then be reminded that I need to send an email to NGI. Once we have answered all the questions in a phase or in a chapter, this will be indicated with a tick mark. So chapter 2 is completed for this phase, while the others have several questions that remains to be answered. So one thing that you will likely want to do is to share your project with collaborators for them to answer some of the questions and also know what your data management plans are. So you can click the share button up to the right, and here you can add specific users, and then that person needs to be a SciLifeLab Data Stewardship Wizard user, and the only thing you have to do to become one is to log in, as we saw at the beginning. So let's add a user here. And once you have added a user, you can select which role that user should have: a viewer, commenter, editor, or owner. And the difference between editor and owner is that the owner also can change the settings of a project. And you can be multiple owners on one project. Another option is to use a public link. And then anyone with the link can either view, comment, or edit the project. For your FAIRstorage application, you don't need to use the share function. All the data stewards responsible for reviewing your data management plan have access to all the data management plans in SciLifeLab Data Stewardship Wizard. So what you need to do is to copy the URL of your project and add it to your super application. Okay, let's go back to the project page and have a look at another project where more questions have been answered. So you can see in this progress bar how far you've come. And we'll use this one. And we again arrive at the questionnaire. But I also want to show you what an output of a data management plan from Data Stewardship Wizard might look like. So in the preview section, or in the preview tab, we can find a preview of a PDF document created from the questionnaire. So in the first page, you have some project overview information, and then you have a section for each chapter, and there will be free-flowing text as answers to your questions. You can also use other formats for your documents. So for example, you can create Word documents and download them. This might be good if you want to refine the document a bit before sending it off to your funder, for example. You can also see which version of the questionnaire the document was created from. Version history is something that you can have a look at here in the questionnaire tab. And each time you answer a question or make a change, there will be a new version, but you can also name versions. And by clicking here, you only see the named ones. So if we look at this, it's the current version. And these ones were named earlier. So coming back to the welcome screen, this is where you find the guide and written guidelines, and get in touch if you have any feedback. If you need any support, we are here to help you. Thank you. Welcome to demonstration of how to use SciLifeLab Data Storage.
All right, so I think we are done there, and we can move on to the next speaker. I think there was a slide also with some contact information that maybe we can show as we transition.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Angela Fuentes Pardo, and I'm going to share. I'm going to do a quick introduction on what the SciLifeLab Data Repository is. This is a very important service for all researchers, and it's very important actually for the super application because researchers need to show commitment on publishing your data. Sorry, I think I'm going to start again because it's not changing the slides. Oh, okay, there you are. And why is it important to share data? Well, in the overall picture, it's very important to share data because it's a fundamental part of the research data life cycle, as shown in this wheel on the right. By sharing data, we are committing with transparency and reproducibility because researchers can access your data, can verify scientific findings, and it's also very important for reusability. Essentially, others can, by having access to your data, can use it, and essentially is a way to maximize the impact of your research data itself. So overall, by research data, we are increasing the fairness of the data itself. Commonly, researchers share data through public repositories, and an often question is, how do you choose the repository that best suit my data? So the first question is perhaps whether the data contains sensitive information. And if this is the case, then data should be deposited should be deposited in specific repositories that restrict the access. If this is not the case, then we can search for discipline-specific repositories. So, for example, sequence data is often stored in ENA or NCBI, which are dedicated repositories for these data types. But if very such specific repositories do not exist, then we can wonder whether institutional repositories are available. So here's where SciLifeLab Data Repository comes in. And in case there's no such institutional repositories available, then one can use general data repositories such as Zenodo or Figshare. So what is in a specific SciLifeLab data repository? Well, it's a web-based system that is open to anyone, and it stores data basically for publication. And is the institutional instance of Figshare, specific for SciLifeLab, and is offered to researchers and staff affiliated to Swedish universities and institutes. So what kind of files can be made accessible through this repository? Basically a wide variety of kinds. So for instance, you can publish the data management plan, data sets, metadata, software, web services, AI models, notebooks, figures, images, posters, presentations, and so on. You name it. And so far, most of our users have used the repository to publish their data sets, presentations, figures, and other kind of resources. So why you should use SciLifeLab Data Repository? Well, because it's a good way to connect your data with its publication. So often our users upload supplementary data, supplementary materials that are linked to a specific manuscript. And overall, this is a good way to increase the fairness of the data, because there are different functionalities that actually make your data more easily findable and accessible. So for instance, data are indexed by Google Dataset Search, Google Scholar. Also, data is integrated with ORCID, which is this person identifier. So the research outputs can be linked to you directly. And also data is citable through his digital object identifier, or DOI. And something that is very important to remember is that generating these persistent identifiers are important and required for the SciLifeLab FAIRstorage. So here I'm just showing some snippets of the guidelines to apply for the SciLifeLab FAIRstorage. And as you see throughout the entire process, since application, during the ongoing research, and for the renewal of the resources, it's important to provide these persistent identifiers. And something that is very relevant for you to know is that it's possible to reserve a DOI even before an item is published. So next, I'm going to quickly walk you through the submission workflow in the SciLifeLab Data Repository. So the first recommendation is to actually look at the submission guidelines, become familiar with that, prepare the required files and metadata. And then once you're ready, go to the specific website, figshare.scilifelab.se, log in using your institutional credentials, and then you can start by creating a new item and fill in the required metadata. So it's at this stage in which it's possible to reserve a DOI for an item, even before it becomes published. So just remember, you can do this even before, at the very first stage when you are creating your data management plan. And so how to do this, how to reserve a DOI is very simple. So you just need to go to the items action menu on the right and select manage identifiers, and then click on reserve DOI. And then unique DOI will be generated for this specific item. Something that you need to remember is that this reserved DOI becomes active only when the item is published. So at this stage, this reserved DOI becomes a placeholder of research outputs, and you can, as I said, add it to your data management plan, or you can create it, throughout the course of your research. So once the submission is ready for publication, so we're talking that it could be a few months or several years later, then when this data is ready to become public, then you submit it for revision. And then here's when the revision starts, and we receive that submission at the SciLifeLab data repository. Essentially, the submission will undergo review and curation by a dedicated team that essentially are accessing the items' findability, accessibility, reusability, and overall completeness. If the reviewers find that some modifications are required, you will be notified, and ideally the item is updated following this suggestions and resubmitted, and then once it's complete, it becomes approved and published, and then that's when the DOI becomes live, essentially. We have different publishing options at the repository. As I mentioned before, the repository is not dedicated for sensitive data. However, there is a functionality for that. But so the first question is, if your item or your data contains sensitive information. If this is not the case, as I said, this is the specific requirement for the repository, and the data or the files are published elsewhere, then in cases, for example, with these files are available in other location, but they do not have an identifier, then you can create an identifier within the repository by creating a linked file option. But then if the data is published for the very first time in the repository, then you have different options. It could be published openly. You can set up an embargo. So essentially the access to the data is limited for a period of time, commonly until a manuscript becomes published. Or you can also create or use a request access functionality. So the access to the data is through a private link. But as I mentioned before, if the data contains sensitive information, well, you cannot publish the data in the repository, but you instead can create a metadata record that essentially points to the users to contact directly the researchers to get access to the data. So as I said, if you have any question, please contact us. There are different ways to do so through our dedicated email fixture at SciLifeLab.se. And here are some links for you to learn more about all the information regarding the repository, submission guidelines, and so on. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We can stop the recording now.